Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this beautiful conversation with an amazing, and inspiring artist, Aude Konan. And during this month, Black History Month, Pride Cymru decided to conduct this conversation to have um, interesting, inspiring, and with people with bigger voices to give us some insights on uh, everything that is Black. And today we're going to kick off things with the amazing Aude Konan, who is going to talk to us. Actually, when I was talking with Aude about this interesting concept, you gave me an interesting theme, which is Black joy, and it was like my eyes googled up, and I was like, yeah, this is interesting. But first of all, I want you to introduce yourself, Aude. So the floor is to you.
Okay, thank you, Rahim. I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to be in Wales in spirit. So my name is Aude Konan, and I am a writer, and I teach people how to write. And I also work as a diversity and inclusion consultant. I started my career writing novels and short stories when I was a kid, and I eventually moved to writing plays and writing scripts and still writing novels. I identify as a bisexual, non-binary person, and I over the years I started teaching people how to write queer stories. It really started by accident on LGBTQ plus History Month a few years ago, and I've realized that not only was it interesting for me, I really do love teaching people the skills to do that. So I've been lucky to work with multiple clients like UK Black Pride, like Stonewall UK, and all this because it's really important for me to really teach people how to write stories that either they identify as or that they are interested in. And today, I really wanted to talk to you and to talk to all of you about Black joy. Why? Because it is Black History Month, and
It is.
Blackness in not just the Western world, everywhere is always
Mhm.
linked to death, to
Mm.
oppression, to violence, now police brutality. All these things are real, but we tend to associate Blackness with all these negative things. So when we have talks around Blackness, it would be around the struggle, because it seems like that people can only be defined as a struggle to overcome racism, struggle to overcome racism, homophobia, and
Mm.
sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and more. I want the goal of my work, of the stories I write, and myself as an individual is to simply help people and myself imagine a world where we might free ourselves to a certain extent from the systems of oppression we live in. And that joy is very important to me because we don't talk about it. We cannot think about Black people because we simply seldom see that. And even if it was a thing, it would be pre-colonization and slavery. But we seldom don't really think about Black people as vectors of joy, as receiving joy, as
Yeah,
spreading joy, happiness. And I really wanted to talk about that today.
I agree because I agree with you because my theme when I was thinking about media representation, the black queerness in general in media representation. And when you said that the black joy, it really triggered a lot of things about every time we talk about black black lives in any form or shape in media. It's all about slavery, the the hardship that they are going through, the sadness, the riots, and all that, and it's really scary. Do you feel the same thing whenever you see a black representation in media, per se?
One thing that is important that I actually forgot to mention is that I think about Black queer youth. I think about the kid I was when I was so confused, when it seemed like my sexuality and my gender identity was a joke. I think that back then I was already reading books, watching stories about how Black queer people have it worse. I think it would have been amazing to see stories about Black joy. I'm thinking that if there are
Mm,
any Black LGBTQ plus young people or older people watching us today, I think it would be good to spread some hope that us having these identities doesn't mean that we're going to die a painful death, that we're going to be at the receiving end of so much homophobia. And even if we do go through that, we still deserve to live and enjoy our lives while we still can. So yeah, obviously
Yeah. So,
representation in the media is abysmal unless, and not, it's not always true, but often, but not always, when that representation will come from Black queer people, there'll be a little bit more joy and more humanity.
uh, for sure. And you talked about your work as a writer, and script writer. Can you give us example of how you are bringing joy in your stories per se?
That is a very, very good question, because if anything, I find my stories depressing. And that it just shows how that unlearning work starts with me as well. I used to write so many depressing stories because that was the only way I was looking at the word. I also used to not write people like me,
Mm.
adding that into the equation. I am really trying now. For example, in my fictional work, I'm currently working on a novel that features two main characters who are Black and queer. And in this novel, I have decided, obviously, that I'm not going to die, and it will be about them discovering a love that transcends everything, a love that allows them to be themselves in their identity, to be cherished, to be seen, and to grow together. Because there's something very beautiful I find about love and about
Mm.
joy, and also about Black love, which is something I kind of wanted to write about.
Oh my God, you know how much I get excited whenever I follow Out magazine on Instagram, and
Yeah.
whenever they share a picture of two Black men or two Black women or two Black non-binary person in a romantic position, in a very love position, I'm filled of joy, like bringing it to the subject.
Yeah.
But who by the way, Liz, I am so sorry if we are going fast, just let us know.
You're
And
fine.
you are doing
You're
amazing.
fine.
You are doing amazing. Thank you very much for being with us. Bringing back to the other creators who've brought joy to the Black creativity. Can you mention any creators who inspired you, or what did you like? When did you realize? What is the turning point for you to say enough is enough? I'm doing positivity. Did anyone inspire you?
Um, um, yes and no. I think from a personal point of view, what happened was that I reached an age where all the characters I would write about would be white and straight. And eventually I was in my 20s and realizing that I couldn't see myself reflected anywhere, and let alone in my own work. And it made me realize
Mm,
that I was uncomfortable with talking about people like myself, and I
mm,
had to try to understand why, and
mm,
I had to try to see if I would grow as a writer by pushing these boundaries and these uncomfortable feelings I had towards my own identity. And then I
mm,
got lucky enough to move to a city and be around other creators that were Black and queer people. Finally, I had
mm,
a chosen family that looked like me, was very different from me in culturally speaking, obviously. But these people, we could rely on each other. We were supporting each other, and that is love. That's love. And they encouraged me to write something like that for myself, for them. And I would say when it comes to and then I guess my own experiences, yeah, meeting other Black queer people, myself like falling in love, and it made me realize that I also falling in love, receiving love, being loved by friends, by romantic partners. And
mm,
obviously a film like Moonlight was amazing for me because fine, it's very depressing in many ways, but
mm,
there's still some moments of joy and beauty. And
mm,
Taro Arvin McCraney, one of the screenwriters and the playwright that wrote it, did a wonderful job. And Pariah, that's also another film by Diri's that I love. And obviously, it is also depressing, but being able to see myself on screen was already a source of joy. Now we can always go further.
You know, when you were talking about depression and joy and finding joy in it, do you know what it reminded me? Because it reminded me of the gospel music and the
Yeah.
jazz music. It's really sad lyrics and it's sad tone, but it gives you joy, and it's very healing. Don't you think? Because now that I'm saying this out loud, it reminds me as well of a genre of music that we have in Morocco,
Yeah.
which is called gnawa, which is really rooted in sub-Saharan countries, and it's very rhythmic and it's very spiritual,
Mm.
and it's used to heal the soul in a way to connect with your inner soul. But when you hear the lyrics, it's very sad, but finding the joy in the depression, and I was and that's really wonderful.
Yeah, because also my personal experiences have been so dealing with mental health, which is unfortunately on brand because black,
Yeah,
bisexual, or just black queer people in general do tend to suffer from more mental health issues and more issues in general. Can be linked to poverty, can be linked to obviously like oppressional systems. And as I grew more comfortable with myself and I learned how to love myself, which is the biggest struggle when everyone around you has been taught and will be actively telling you, showing you, and how that you should hate yourself. That was something that was very powerful. And that's just something that I've realized in my personal life as well is that you go through so many tough times, but you will also go through joyful moments. That's just a thing. For
true.
example, even when sometimes you're depressed, you always have at least like one moment when you will feel slightly better. And I do not want to deny the sad feelings, but I want us to think about the joyful moments because we need them.
Yeah, definitely. And you talked about mental health, and I feel like now we were saying that mental health in the Black communities is not talked about enough. It's not addressed well enough, and it's not treated the way it should be treated. And we cannot talk about Black History Month without talking the Black Lives Matter movement that is really taking new shape, and things are slightly changing for the better. But what I'm thinking as well is because as someone who is open about my asylum case situation, sometimes I feel it's a burden to educate all the time and to be always asked questions and always talk about your traumas and always talk about the sad parts and feel the and leave the joy part. Do you think that the Black community are feeling this burden more now?
Yeah, I think we always do feel that burden because anti-blackness is the glue that binds all community together. We are at the bottom of every single community's literally. It's not just white people, so we always have to fight for survival and we always have to explain our humanity. Actually, it's not me, it's like Franz Fanon and plenty of great thinkers who have a theory that simply when there was a construction of a human being, black people were not included in that. Were not seen as human
Yeah.
beings and we've never seen as human beings because if we were human beings, we wouldn't have to defend our humanity over time. We don't have to prove that we are as smart, as brilliant, as eloquent. We wouldn't prove that we should be we should have justice. We shouldn't prove that we have to be perfect. And that's the same thing with Black Lives Matter. Obviously, when you are oppressed, that all the weight is on your shoulders. When you are oppressed, you are supposed to ask the oppressors to stop killing you, to treat you with respect, to treat you with
Mm,
humanity. But if you're never seen as human, it's not going to
mm.
happen. And also, if the oppressed has all the power, what are they going to reply to you? So that's something I've always been adamant about. There is definitely a weight on, I cannot speak for the Black community all over the world. There's definitely a weight on Black people to have to explain ourselves. And that is ridiculous because unfortunately, that is something that the oppressors ask for us because it's kind of like a game. I'm going to ask you to talk to me for
Yeah.
your pain. I'm going to laugh at you because your pain makes me feel more powerful. Your pain makes me laugh because that's something that will never happen to me. That's something I will never be able to relate. And the reason why Black joy is important for me is because I encourage everyone to stay away from the gaze of the oppressors. And when it comes to Black people, from whiteness as a whole,
Mm.
trying to. It's almost impossible to, but at least trying to. Because with that job, we don't have to explain ourselves. We don't have to try to explain humanity that's always been denied to us. We do not have to explain our suffering. We don't have to explain why we should be alive and why our lives matter. We literally just have to center ourselves, and we have to try to find joy in the life we live in.
Mm. Mm. And I think this is bringing my. I mean, wow. I don't know how to follow up that, and this is not. It should, as an interviewer, I should not say that. but uh, but how can we make space for joy if there is if like because there's a lot of crowdness and there is a lot of um, you know what is happening in the world, but how can we make space for joy?
I am big on meditation and I am big on yoga. And the other day, I was feeling hopeless, which has happened a lot with
Mhm.
COVID-19. We've been separated from everyone during winter, and the effect is going to have on all of us. More further restrictions are going to happen in multiple European countries. And I remember feeling all of that and then breathing. And I had to remember that I had a body for now. And breathing reminded me that I was there. I was there. And then I talked to someone that, and I mentioned how much I loved water, how much I love swimming, and how much I love going to the sea. And
Mm.
suddenly, I realized that there were things that brought me joy that I forgot about because I haven't been to the sea in a while. I haven't been to almost a year. And when it comes to joy, how can we find joy? I would say um, meditation helps because it puts me
Mm.
in a space that is beyond the physical and metaphysical limitations that surround me. I'd say on a personal level, I have a gratitude journal. And when it seems like things are hopeless, like having money issues, relationship issues, having issues around health, around COVID, I love to look back at it and remember the
Mm.
things that brought me joy at some point because some of them are
It's
not
like
completely gone. So I would say
it's
that
like a series of reflection and remembering the good times and
remembering the good times help.
capitalizing them.
Yeah. And another thing that's really important is having a community. If you have a community,
Yeah.
they will help you find joy. If you can confide in them, they will always find a way to support you. Hopefully, if they're a great community, they'll find a way to support you. They'll find a way to listen to you when you are feeling hopeless, and will find ways to support you and be there with you when you're going to find joy. You know,
Mm.
and there is that. That would be
And
one.
I think the sense of a community was really, for, at least for me, was really the need of a community was really obvious during these
Yeah,
circumstances where everyone is confined to their homes and all that, and how many prides, including Pride Cymru, went virtual instead of physical, and we felt how we a lot of things that we were taking for granted now they showed how important they are, and one of them is community, and I agree with you. And reminiscing and remembering the old times about how we were always help us going forward. I actually wanted to ask you this question, but I don't know if I should or not because I didn't ask you. I didn't ask permission before, but because I know that you are from France and you live in the UK. When in this duality between your French, living in French as a black person and living in the UK as a black person, is there any similarities or differences, or is a place more joyful than another place per se? And or are you comfortable to talk about that, or you're not comfortable to talk about that?
I'm comfortable talking about that because yeah, I'm comfortable talking about that. That's very funny because in the UK, especially London, London is one of the loneliest places I've ever lived in. the sense of community is not always there, especially when you are a foreigner, especially when you don't hold
Mm,
citizenship, when you haven't grown up there, and when you know almost no one. Um, I didn't really felt a community until a few years down the line, where in France, in Paris especially, because I was born there and I grew up there, I had my childhood friends, I had some family members, I had some friends that I made in adulthood. Um,
mm,
and so there was always that, and then also because that's weird, but I'll say that culturally speaking, French people are very rude, but they'll be warmer. They'll be
mm,
more willing to make time for you, and they'll be more willing to know you, especially even if you haven't grown up together or gone to the same schools.
yeah,
It wasn't even a
yeah.
language barrier in London, it was simply cultural. It's pretty complicated to make friends in adulthood. Thankfully, a few years ago, things changed, and I finally had been able to get my own community in London. And contrary to Paris, it was people who looked at me. People were black queer individuals who have been through some of the things I have been through, but also with completely different
Mm,
lives, and were able to speak a similar language and understand each other. And I would say both of these places have brought me joy and lots of sorrow.
mm,
When I go to
mm,
Paris and I'm there for only a few days, it is great. I see my friends, I go visit museums, I eat way too much, and I go to the bookstores, and that's great. But also, obviously, being like in the UK, everything is so fast paced, and there's so many different like not communities, but there'll be so many different groups. For example, I don't know,
mm,
I'm a nerd-ish, and I know where I can find other nerds. I know that I can go to like these places and I will find the most unique groups. Like I don't know, black nerds from America that have lived in Europe half of their lives, or I don't know, black queer nerds who only like the color green. I know I will be able to find these groups in
mm.
London because diversity is more tolerated
Oh, wow.
in the UK in general. Not saying that people are more tolerant, yeah, will be more tolerant, which is not necessarily true, but it will be more tolerated. And I would say eventually, to be fair, outside of the language barrier, the welfare system, and the food, and maybe sometimes the culture, these countries are all Western countries where Black people feel unwelcome and are oppressed. So we find joy where we
Oh,
can, but
yeah. Maybe we create our own joy. Probably
we create our
like you
own
said,
joy and our own
like you going back what you said about depression and finding joy
yeah,
in those low moments and finding the how do you call it, silver lightning in
yeah,
these dark moments, and it's beautiful, and we should remind ourselves all the time to do that. And you mentioned earlier in the introduction that you do workshops actually, and you provide workshops for young talented writers as well. Can you talk about some workshops that you did and the highlights of some of them if you can?
yeah. So my workshops are not just for young people because it's also important for older
Oh,
people.
sorry.
And no, no
I always
worries.
think about myself young.
That is true. That is true. There's some people that are not young and they still deserve to get a chance to learn how to write. So that's really important to to know that. So I have been doing workshops for actually 3 years now. I think we're around my third year anniversary, and it really started. No, 4 years. Oh my god. Yeah, 4 years. It really started by accident. A friend asked me to do workshops, and I didn't feel legitimate because I only had one book out by then, but I still
Mm,
did it, and it was really fun. So I would say the highlight of my workshops would be having people telling me that I have allowed them to write, to feel comfortable about themselves, to have a great moment, and now they're going to pursue it, or just people telling me they love having that self-care moment, even if they're not going to pursue writing. People telling me that they have been able to write stories that represent them and that they feel good about them,
mm,
seeing themselves. like in words is amazing. So one of my most
True.
popular workshop is how to write queer stories, and that one I've done that a lot before, and it's just great because sometimes we'll be with people who are not don't identify as LGBTQ plus, and they would learn about our stories and identities, and also there will be people identifying as LGBTQ plus, and it would be a great way for them to kind of like write
And
about.
I attended one of your workshop actually, and I
You
attended
did,
one of your workshop, and
you did.
a lot of us were like just new to this, and the way you explain things, and the way you use expressions that we were not familiar with in the Black culture, and I don't remember the exact expression you used, but you talked about when usually in the media we always see a Black person run into the white family as a comfort, and we've seen this recently just in the recent film with Mignon and or Cuties, and this is still a trend and is still going happening, and it's it's. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so what I've mentioned is Homo nationalism, which is more
Homo
for
nationalism.
queer people, queer people of color, but it's also a trend that can be shown in straight stories, where the idea is that we are oppressed by our culture, and whiteness is the way to be liberated. To truly be a citizen of a European Western country, we have to give in to whiteness by stripping ourselves from our culture. In a British context, it means sometimes keeping some elements of your culture, but still stripping most of it. In a French context, it would be more violent. It means literally bleaching yourself white. Homo nationalism
Oh
is more
wow.
specific, where basically Homo nationalism is a belief that um, communities of color and literally black and brown countries are more homophobic than the white ones, and that basically every time we have a portrayal of black and brown queer people in the media, they would suffer more homophobia because their countries are more their countries are more their countries and their communities, because even for the ones that
Homotolerant.
are born in Western countries, they'll be more homophobic. They oppress them more, and that by default, white cultures and white countries will be less homophobic. Obviously, it's a complete it's completely disregarding history, and the history of, especially the history
Yeah.
anti-sodomy laws, especially in a British context, because it's different in the French context, because we didn't really have um, anti-sodomy laws in France, because when the Code Civil that is basically, let me not go into like a law, look at me trying to use my law degree, but anyway, there was no there
I
was,
lost a lot of that. Could you just go back a little bit?
yeah,
I lost
sorry.
some of that.
So with Homo nationalism, it's a complete disregard of the history of anti-sodomy law in the UK, and how when the UK colonized other countries, they imported these laws that are still in there in many of the countries that Britain has colonized. Most of the countries in the world have been colonized by the UK. And one aside is that in France, they didn't really have anti-sodomy law, because when they wrote the Code Civil, which is a book where you find most of the laws in France. Sorry, not the Code Civil, the Code Penal, which are from
The lights
basically,
code, yeah.
yeah. So they didn't really have anti-sodomy laws, because when they wrote the code, one of the people who wrote it was actually gay and close to the king. So when French people colonized many countries over the world, they, not saying that they were less homophobic, but they didn't have official laws, which is the reason why, for example,
They did in Morocco actually,
they did in Morocco. But the question
and
is,
they did in Algeria and Tunisia.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That I didn't know actually, because when I looked at sub-Saharan countries, not saying a handful of them didn't have anti-sodomy law, because simply the French didn't put them there. And sometimes these countries will actually be
Mm.
neighborhood countries with over African countries that had anti-sodomy laws, spread to them, forced upon them by the Brits. But that's interesting, because in Morocco you have that, and it's coming directly from the French.
Yeah,
That's
and it's done by le Général Lyoté,
okay.
Général Lyoté, and uh, and he was a homosexual as well, and he imposed that
Oh,
law.
okay.
Yeah, so it's an interesting dive into history,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
actually because of Black History Month, and it's I mean all this is I think this is just at the beginning of
It's
a
literally,
long discussion and
yeah.
conversation, and we can never be fully educated, and that's why it talks about burden, and the burden should not ever be put on one person,
Yeah.
and we should make our own efforts to educate ourselves. There is YouTube, there is Google, there is Wikipedia, there is a lot of references, and that brings me to your book recommendation for us to read, Aude.
Okay, so there are two books that I really love at the moment. The first one is called Real Life by Brendan Taylor, that has been shortlisted for the Booker Prize in the UK. It is a wonderful book. It's the story of a young black gay student studying STEM at an American college, and that's him navigating queer life, loneliness, surviving in a very white world. The other one is
Mhm.
old-ish, has been released like I think a year or 2 years ago, called How to Love a Jamaican, and it's a
How
collection of
to?
How to Love a Jamaican, and
Oh,
it's really funny. It's a collection of short stories. Not all short stories are queer, but one of them is a wonderful story featuring a queer woman, black woman on holiday in Jamaica, and it tells the story of a friendship with straight woman and the complexities around that. And it's a wonderful book.
and do you recommend a film to watch for us? Even fiction, documentary, any visual thing?
I mean, if you haven't already watched Midnight, you have to.
Yeah, moment.
I've watched it again a few weeks ago. I found a way not to cry. I'm very proud of myself. So
Ah,
yeah, I would say Midnight. I wish I had an example that were kind of like more recent, but
yeah.
on the top of my head, I cannot think of anything. So I would say, yeah, watch Midnight. It's on Netflix, not like advertising for Netflix. But yeah,
And a song?
a song. So there is that. So there's a black queer American DJ called LSD XOXO that I love,
Yeah.
and he does plenty of great mixes. And he has a song called Angel Dust that is a mix of baile funk, hip hop, and I just love it because I love to dance. I love to have fun, and like you've mentioned, we won't have these spaces where we socialize with other queer people and where we have fun, dancing, partying, interacting, sometimes fighting, sometimes loving. We won't have these spaces until 2021 or maybe more beyond. So yeah, I would say play that music and dance at home if you like to dance.
Yeah, and there is a song about, I think there is another song about a black French DJ. I don't know their pronouns, unfortunately, but they are
Oh
Kitty
yeah,
Smiles?
yeah,
Kitty
yeah.
Smiles also.
I
But
think
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this word here, but the B word. Lit the B word?
yeah.
No, that was
Okay,
the
okay.
song.
I've never listened to. Actually, I should be listening because that's
It's
like
very vogue. It's very vogue,
really. Oh
and
my god. Okay.
it's very sassy, and and there is a beautiful black representation of the French les banlieues de
Yeah,
France,
yeah.
Paris, and all that.
There'll be the French
It's a
project.
beautiful. Yeah, the French projects. Oh, thank you. The French project, and it's beautiful. It's very ballroomy and
Yeah.
very makes you feel dancing. It's amazing. Before we finish, have I forgotten to ask you a question, or didn't talk about a subject you wanted to talk about, or anything
Well, I think we
you
covered.
wanted to say or to add?
Well, happy Black History Month. try to celebrate by learning more about your history. And
Mm.
if you're Black, celebrate Black joy. If you're Black and queer, please do that. That's important for survival. Yes, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that's all. That was really cool.
I'm so lucky to call you a friend, by the way. I'm so lucky, and I'm so proud of you
Thank
and everything
you.
you are doing, and your voice and your radiant smile, and oh, I love you so much.
Oh,
And
thank
how
you.
people can find you in social media and
Yeah. So all my socials are the same handle, which is at Aude Konan, AudeKonan. You can be in touch if you're interested in my workshops. I have one. If you're 16 and 25 and identify as LGBTQ plus one, I have one on October the 15th. It's going to be an online one. I'm not doing any workshops in real life until 2021. So if you're a young
nice.
person, you can do that. And also, if you're a Black queer person, I'm going to have a workshop on how to write Black. If you're a Black African, sorry, a Black African queer person, I'm going to do a workshop on how to write Black African queer stories. I'm so excited because I've never done something so specific for people like me, and because I'm African.
Yes,
And so yeah,
and
that
I'm
one.
African too, so
Yes, yes. So
that's why I'm excited.
yeah, so that one I will show. I would like share it in my socials. But for now, if you're a young person, you can attend my next workshop on October 15th, and you can find it more about that on my socials.
And I'm sure we're gonna link all the details for all your social media and all everything that is necessary with this video. I want to thank you so much for joining me. And Liz, you were a champion. Thank you for your hard work. And I'm sorry if we were talking so fast sometimes.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank
And
you.
ensuring that the BLS community is included. Um, I'm Rahim. I'm Rahim. I am the BAME officer of Pride Cymru, and thank you very much for listening to us. And see you in the next one. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.